everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Since they returned to the stage in 2009 and all the way to today, Phish has continually proven that they still have the goods, that they've avoided the trap of becoming a dreaded nostalgia act. They've proven it in a number of ways. Whether it's reinventing themselves as different bands for Halloween, releasing several albums since they came back, changing their touring setup to allow for more multi-night runs, or the tried and true method of keeping fans interested, playing extremely long and exploratory jams that go down as some of the most perfect examples of extended improvisation in music history. Today's guest, Andy Rapacz, picked one of those jams to discuss today. Simple, from July 27th, 2024 at Alpine Valley. Starting from the ashes of a typical Sigma Oasis that opened the second set, this version of Simple is easily in the conversation for the title of Best Version Ever. Just as impressive as the music, the fact that it was played 40 years into the band's career adds a certain psychological boost to the idea that it was played at all. Andy is a Wisconsin native, so he gives plenty of background context to Alpine Valley, what it was like to see such an impressive jam in his home venue, and the fact that he's an exercise physiologist who deals with neurological dysfunction. It adds a whole new dimension to the discussion about how Phish's sound makes you feel, literally. So let's join Andy to talk about Halloween 1994, how time is relative during great jams, and steep lawns, as we discuss Simple from July 27th, 2024 at Alpine Valley. Andy, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm well, Brian. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk some Phish.
I'm excited to talk some Phish. I always am. This is like the best part of my week to do stuff like this, and I'm really excited to talk about the single performance, and I almost hesitate to call it a single song because it's a 40-minute jam, and it's like there's entire worlds in this jam, even though it's listed on any track list as one song. And just to be clear, you chose to discuss Phish's performance of Simple from July 27th, 2024 at Alpine Valley. And we've had plenty of shows or episodes on here where people talk about Alpine Valley, so I'm excited to get your side of it. But man, I've listened to this jam when you first suggested it a dozen times, and then in the last week or so when we were gearing up for this recording, maybe a dozen more, and I cannot get enough of it.
Yeah, it's one that you just keep coming back to. It's funny. We'll talk a little bit more, but I have a history with Simple, and it seems like Simple just keeps drawing me back. But this one for sure it's in that Ripper category, and it'll be fun to talk more in depth about it.
Oh, definitely. But before we get to Simple, let's get to the basics, Andy, and let's hear about you as a Phish fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So, Andy, when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember about it?
My first Phish show was August 15th, 2010 at Alpine Valley, which seems a lot more recent than I like to think of when my fandom started. I kind of consider myself a lost Phish fan in terms of generationally. I graduated from high school in 2004. I grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, home of Justin Vernon, Bon Iver. Eau Claire has one Phish credit to its name. Trey played their live solo acoustic in 2019, and he played a Bon Iver song and compared Eau Claire to Burlington. So that's my little claim to fame with my hometown. Cool. But I started listening to Phish because my parents were high school teachers, and they asked the jazz kids what I should listen to because I showed an aptitude to music. So I started listening to a live one. Was my first Phish CD, and that just made me curious. Like, what is this stuff? Yum, especially, just like, how is this this classically composed song? So I was very fortunate. Like my dad was a big Moody Blues guy, so that was my first concert experience. Phish always intrigued me, but just by where I was, I played a lot of soccer growing up. So in those early 2000s, when I was in high school, I never got to see them. And then 2004, I graduate, go to college, and stop playing competitive soccer, and all of a sudden there's no Phish. But the beauty of growing up in the early 2000s in high school and knowing people know you like music is you get a lot of Best Buy gift cards. So I would buy as many of the live Phish releases as I possibly could, and then that just translated to iTunes gift cards and the same thing. I remember the Glens Falls episode that you did, and that was one of my go-tos. And that as context for this episode, because I was thinking back to it, and Simple is the song right before Divided Sky in that Glens Falls show. And so I always had this really negative connotation with Simple because it was the song before Divided Sky. So it was like a skip song for me. And it was just funny how Simple has just continued to turn up in my life that way. So 10 years we're building. I saw, Trey in different solo settings. I saw, Mike out with Bonnaroo 2005. So I saw all of these things, was listening to all this live Phish, but I'd never seen them live until they got back together. And so then in 2010, Alpine was my first shows that they made into the live DVD release. So my first show was actually the second night of that run, the Saturday night, and it was just like a scripted first show. I had, it was Tweezer out of the gates, then AC/DC Bag, Divided Sky, Ghost, Yum. It was just a great set. I was right in front of the soundboard, so in the middle with my buddy, and it was just magical. If I was going to give someone a Phish experience, that would be it. So Alpine feels like home. So that has a lot of context. Even though I've seen them at Dick's more than I've seen them at Alpine, just by the sheer volume that they play Dick's. But Alpine's home, Wisconsin's home. That's where I'm from.
When you called yourself a lost Phish fan generationally, you mean because once you got the opportunity to go see them, like once you kind of got, in quotes, free, right? To like out of high school or out of college, they were not available, right? Because I'm only a couple years ahead of you in terms of school years. And I felt the same way because I graduated high school in 2000. So by the time I got to college, which was the fall of 2000, I was all ready to be irresponsible. I was all ready to just hop in the car, and they're gone for 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that commonality, which I think is, it's interesting too when we talk about the age of this band. I think of 2010 as recent, right? That's 14 years ago.
I
Right?
do too.
Like,
I
how
was talking to a
crazy.
guest recently, and we were going through a show where almost all of the songs, not quite all, but almost all, out of, let's say, 12 songs in the first set, like 9 of them were 3.0 or what people might call 4.0 songs. And I'm like, oh, they're all new songs. And then you look at something like Kill Devil Falls, it's been around for 15 years. And you compare
Yeah,
that to a new song in 95 or Simple, which debuted in 94, I think, right? That
right.
it wasn't even 15 years. They hadn't even been together. When you do it proportionately like that, it blows your mind. But I'm with you. It doesn't feel like that long ago, or it should have been that long ago.
Right. It's wild to have those like contextual marks and be like, oh yeah, but if we look at it this way, that's like
Yeah,
15 years is 15 years.
it's not going to get better as we get older either.
No, but it speaks to the volume that they keep amassing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's part of the story.
Well, if that's just about 15 years ago, Andy, what was your most recent show and what did you think of it?
So my most recent show, I did one night at Dick's. I did the Saturday night. I went out and back in less than 24 hours and caught a show with my buddy, which was like the exact opposite experience of the Alpine shows were for me. So at Dick's, I was there with a huge group of friends. We were way out, where the Alpine shows, I was in the pit into it. So I've never have a bad Phish experience, but it was, average show, but it was really, being with the friends. So never going to say that I didn't enjoy a Phish show, but
Right. Well, there are some that you go back to for the memories more so than the music
for
when you
sure.
get to a certain point. So that's always good. There's never a bad reason to see Phish. And, sometimes it turns out in the end, the reason was to see your friends. You just
Right.
don't know it going in.
Yeah.
So since Alpine Valley is your home turf, right, your home venue, and you obviously seem super comfortable there and proud of it. I've never been to Alpine Valley. Alpine Valley and Deer Creek are my two white whale venues that I haven't seen. So to me, Alpine Valley and Deer Creek specifically have this kind of aura surrounding them from when I first got into the band. So I've never been there. But what I've heard from Alpine Valley, a million things, but the one thing that everyone brings up, two things they bring up: the tree. Everyone always brings up the tree, and everybody always brings up the lawn, how steep it is. So I ask you, as a hometown expert, the steepness of the lawn at Alpine Valley, is it exaggerated, or are people being fair when they criticize it?
It's for real. I don't know that it deserves criticism because it's a ski hill, right? Where you built a
Right.
music venue on. But it's for real. I'm an exercise physiologist, and like the physiology of Phish is one of the things that we'll talk about. And just, but I track my heart rate during all the shows, and I like seeing how fast I can get going up the hill. And I get my heart rate up to like 150 beats per minute, which is pretty high for me doing something. So that hill is no joke. I've actually never watched a show from the lawn. I've always been in the pavilion or the pit, so I can't speak to what that's like. But that's something that I should probably do sometime just to get a sense for what that feels like during an actual show. But it's
You
steep. It's
you
steep.
should, just as a completist, like
Yeah.
as my hometown venue, I guess these days is Madison Square Garden, and I've never been on the Chase Bridge, and I've always wanted to. I think the Chase Bridge is the shittiest part of Madison Square Garden. I think it actually ruins a huge part of the venue, but to be up there looks like it's a ton of fun. And I feel
Yeah.
like I can't say I've been everywhere in the venue unless I've also been up there. So,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not here to tell you how to do your business, but it just seems like something that would be fun to do, to go on the lawn.
I feel that too. And that feels like the way to introduce, like, bring kids into the mix too.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, I can't be bashing something or making a real judgment unless I've actually experienced it, right? That's what it's all about.
Right, right. And finally, the question that closes every lightning round question, Andy. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
So the weirdest thing that I've seen at a Phish show, well, it's more like the all encompassment of what a crazy random Phish experience is that I subjected my now wife to at Alpine Valley, no less. She was also at one of the Dick shows the first year, and the night ended with me crawling under a fence to sneak back into the campground that I had a wristband for. That's a different story. This story involves showing up at a friend's house, a friend of a friend, bringing my wife, who had never been to meet any of my Phish friends before, right? So we pull up to a friend of a friend's parents' house that we're camping in the backyard at. We get picked up by a stretch Hummer that my friends had arranged. Right, we're like doing this thing. We're all in. Our Hummer driver is maybe not on the up and up as it seems. So we spend like a good 15 minutes where we stop at a sketchy gas station outside of East Troy, and he just disappears for a while. And then he comes back, everything's fine. So my wife is like super sketched out, like, what are we doing? Like, what have you gotten me into? And we're in the middle of having a kid in front of us doing a lot of powder drugs, holding a cigarette in my wife's face. She is like about had it, and I'm having the come to Jesus, like, like, you just gotta like block it out, like focus on the music, like come to Jesus, like everybody's doing it in their own way. And the girl behind us, who hadn't moved or like hadn't been claimed by anybody, vomits on the floor, splatters everywhere on my wife's legs. But my point in telling that as my crazy Phish story is that this woman married me and has openly encourages me to go chase this crazy band around. And this song that we're going to talk about occurred on our 11-year wedding anniversary. So it is with her full blessing that I go out and experience Phish, because she knows what it brings to me, and she likes Phish for the music, but she's probably seen her last Phish show with me, which is fine for everybody.
When was this show played?
So let's take a look at the summer of 2024. It should be noted, and I don't like to date when these episodes are recorded, but it should be noted that we are currently rounding the corner into the last quarter of 2024. We are toward the end of the year. And at this point, I haven't quite counted, but I think I've recorded 4 or 5 episodes about this calendar year, about Phish in 2024. So something this year lit a match under the fan base, certainly with the band, but something struck a nerve with us. And it's something that a lot of people want to talk about. So I'm just going to give a very quick summary of what 2024 has been like. But Andy, I want to hear really, and I think listeners would be better served to hear what your experience and your thoughts are about either the summer tour or the year so far. But to focus in on the summer, the tour was made up of 18 shows at 7 venues, which to me is the new normal, right? Fewer venues with a shorter amount of shows, right? So very few single or double shows at the same venue where it's more 3-night runs, maybe a 2-night stand, and then 3-night runs where only 7 venues. That's not a traditional tour, or now it's become new tradition. And then, of course, the Mondegreen Festival at the end of the summer before, as you mentioned earlier, the Labor Day blowout at Dick's, which always happens at the end of August around Labor Day. The tour began at Great Woods with 3 nights, moved to Mohegan Sun, but in my opinion, it was this 3-night run at Alpine Valley, July 26th, 27, 28, that to me caught the attention of a lot of fans. And it was a bunch of different factors. There was the tour moving to the Midwest, which has larger venues, I think, to a fan base that, in my opinion, is underserved. And I apologize to all the fans listening in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful weather. We were very lucky this summer. And also leaving the indoor venue of Mohegan Sun. There were extended jams that made it feel to me more of a great summer tour as opposed to just a bunch of stretches where it's kind of uneventful. And this version of Simple, I'd want to hear more from you, but this version of Simple in real time during the tour, I think it opened the door to the magnificent Tweezer from the first night of St. Louis, which was after Alpine Valley. And then at Deer Creek, night 1, there was this Down with Disease Fest and a monster second set of night 3 of Deer Creek, which was just a 4-song second set. And the band is back to this what's old is new sort of thing, like a new version of their old tricks, where unexpected song placements, playing around with the songs, were like in Deer Creek when they were playing Down with Disease and they kept going back into Down with Disease. I don't want to step on any toes, but to me it had hints of almost the Moby Dick show from 2000, also in Noblesville. And the extended jam that broke not just 20 minutes, but 30 minutes. I mean, I could go all the way back to Mexico of 2024, night 3, when that Choctaws torture just broke the mold and gave us a clue of what to expect in 2024. So what's old is new, but also they're adjusting to this new touring model that kind of builds up anticipation for 3-night runs in places that have long storied histories. What was your view and your take of the summer 2024 tour?
Yeah, you encapsulated it well. It felt building, right? It felt like that chalk dust from Mexico. Like I remember that kind of stirred the pot.
Yeah.
Like people started talking about like did you hear that? We started hearing mumbles of that, and then like they played those indoor shows out east, and it just kind of felt like they were building momentum, and then you could feel the energy building into Alpine too, and that combination of being a big outdoor shed that it felt like they were ready to have liftoff. And then even the My Friend on Friday night it felt like a tease, right? It felt like that
Song of the year for
first
me.
set.
My
Yeah,
friend, song of 2024.
right. And like, who would have thought that, right?
Right.
Yeah, congratulations if that was on your sheet. To that point, like even going into to the Saturday night, it was like we got that Friday night. Like it just felt like something was going to be special, right? And then it turned into, all right, we did this, but we can do it in these other ways too. And we saw that throughout the rest of that summer tour. And like even, right, like the Billy Strings sit in, and like they're
Right.
just like it feels, to your point, that they're really comfortable with who they are. And I think, some of the interviews and like the GQ interview that they did, and the Trey interview,
New album.
new album, right, evolve even, right, like they've evolved, and like they're really comfortable with who they are, and what they want to be and how to do it. And it feels like that's caught on in their playing.
So, of all the shows that you've seen, and not even a full show, you zeroed in on this jam. I know we'll get into it in detail, but what was it about this version of Simple that, of all the different songs and even shows that you could have chosen, you messaged me to talk about it? If you could encapsulate it in just a short description, what's your elevator pitch for why you have attendance bias toward this song and this performance?
This song, this version of Simple, the 72724 Alpine Valley, is a physiological journey. It takes you on a journey from the center of the earth into outer space, and then back down for a smooth landing. And it hits all the different tones, gives you just enough time to get a taste for what's like there, and then brings you in for a smooth, soft landing.
Well said. So, anyone who's listening that has not yet heard this version of Simple, press pause, go listen to it, and then come right back to this conversation. Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work, and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor. If you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways: if you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use, if you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it, or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendance-bias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. So this version of Simple was played as the second song in set 2. They opened it with a kind of standard version of Sigma Oasis. Before we get to the Simple and break it down, can you give a brief summary of what the first set was like and what the vibe in the venue was, at least from your perspective?
Yeah, the first set was great. Personally, I got to check off a couple of most commonly played not scenes off my list. So I got a Foam, which I had never seen, obviously, and then the Lizards. Like the Lizards was so warm and welcome for me for lots of different reasons. But we had Moon Age Daydream that kind of set like the crowd on fire, and it just seemed like we were ready to roll. It got to the point and that set break when I was sitting there, and it just felt like we were playing with house money. But it felt like there were no rules. Like everything was on the table. The energy was certainly building, and it was like, what could possibly happen?
Well, anything could possibly happen.
Right, yeah.
But so they play Sigma Oasis, and it kind of drifts into this version of Simple. And Lord knows anyone who's been seeing this band for any amount of time knows that Simple can come from anywhere. And all it takes is Trey to start playing the riff. And in this version, Trey's playing the riff before the band has kind of caught up with him. And for the first, I don't know, maybe 40 seconds, it might feel a little longer, but I would guess around 30 seconds or 40 seconds, that they're not yet synced up. And maybe it's because they're all playing at different tempos. Maybe Fishman's Head is still in Sigma Oasis, but eventually they kind of have to all stop. And then within a second's notice, now they're playing Simple proper, which lasts about 4.5 minutes before the jam begins with Paige and Phish holding it steady, which is unusual. Normally it's Trey and Mike. Trey noodles to find a groove, but Mike, that was something else we did bring up for Phish in 2024. Mike Gordon was kind of leading all the jams in the beginning, and this version of Simple is no exception. and he's high and then low playing, kind of a reference, maybe not intentional, but in my ears, to Phil Lesh's playing, grabs Trey's attention, and then they play in sync before everyone does go low and quiet, which is how almost all great jams start. And Page takes the chance, and he's on piano, kind of like boogie woogie piano to start.
Yeah, it starts off and it's almost like they're scheming, right? Like we get that
Yeah.
classic like out of the gates where they're out of sync. And my personal bias towards simple, right, is that's my skip song. So like having it start disjointed is just like the perfect encapsulation of my history with simple. But then they kind of lock it in, and that first jam section reminds me of a Dix. It's like 82914. That's I did my master's project on how good teams should work. I did it on how jam bands are a good encapsulation, because you have to listen to each other, right? And so that beginning section of this jam like reminds me of that, like classic type 2, just kind of like finding a voice. But then it really hits me like when Mike, it's at like the 5:30, 7:30 mark, somewhere in there, where Mike kind of asserts and they kind of settle into this groove. But and that happens throughout too, where they kind of, when they're meandering, it's like Mike grabs the reins and he's like, all right, like here's our idea, let's expound upon it. So it's really interesting to see and to hear it too, to hear how Mike's really coming through, because he's not always asserting himself out of the gates. It's like he's cautious, which is fun to hear too, because when he goes for it, then like, all right, they're onto something. It's like he takes a little bit of convincing.
Yeah, right. He can be timid, but in this year, this calendar year, he is not. And I don't know if it's a matter of his personality and his style of playing, or if it's the physical setup of the sound in the room. Who knows? Whatever it is, it works. And you mentioned something just about 5 minutes ago that I'm very curious about. And I apologize, I missed the second half. You said that you are into physiological, what is it, psychology? I can't remember the second word you said.
So I'm an exercise physiologist.
Okay.
So I work with people with neurological diagnosis, specifically spinal cord injuries, so neurological dysfunction. And that's, like one of my overriding things as I approach Phish is to like physiologically what's happening, right? To evoke these senses. And that's where I feel too, like the beginning of this jam portion, right, is really terrestrial. It's kind of grindy. It's really grounded. And Trey is kind of trying to find where his voice might be going, but it's really like Mike driving the engine, and then Phish is like pushing the steam. Like where can we take this thing? Which is fun to hear that kind of build up start to happen.
Yeah, I had a lot of similar notes. By around 9 minutes, they have this kind of like groupthink where oddly Fishman was the only one not playing the same rhythm as the rest of the band. He's just holding it steady. And I thought that's where things get interesting. So I got to ask, when you're present in a show as an exercise physiologist, are you aware? Like, is that where your mind goes? Do you listen to the show or dance or move through that lens, or is that something when you listen back after the fact that you start poke around, looking at it from a professional point of view?
I track my heart rate. Like I know to it's fun for me to go and look at a set list and then compare my heart rate data to it. I'm in tune with it. I'm in tune with how my body feels, and that's where being in the pit is a really fun, visceral way for me to experience a show. So I'm moving a lot. Like my phone thinks that I'm running like miles and miles at a normal show, right? But it's that feeling, that connection, right, that I'm really trying to be in tune with. And it's the music. Mike talked about his new rig with the rumble pad that he's been using since the Sphere, where they didn't have on-stage monitors, right? So part of the bass is he's getting the vibration, right? That's something that we're all viscerally experiencing. We have the auditory input, so physiologically, that's in conjunction making us feel a certain way. So I'm especially into tune with that and thinking about like what can we measure, right?
Right.
And because they're EQing all of their sound, right? We're working with parameters that we know, and it's all fascinating to me. So I'm not thinking about in the moment necessarily like the science part of it, but I'm really trying to think about what feelings are evoking and how my body's feeling. And especially like when we get to the later part of the jam, when Mike when they all explore some dark space, like that, it gets pretty fun.
Yeah, it almost made me change lanes when I was listening to it in the car. I know exactly the part you're talking about. But we're not there yet because this is such a long jam. At 10 and a half minutes, the crowd really seems especially into it. They kind of fall into this upbeat funk groove, and you're talking about your step count, sort of, right? How your phone or your watch, whatever device you use, measures your steps. I imagine that around 10 and a half minutes, it's impossible not to dance during this. Like Trey was on rhythm guitar, which I always am a fan of. I have this sense that when Trey goes to rhythm, good things are going to happen. Like the pressure is off him, and he knows it's not that he doesn't trust the other guys at any given moment, but when it comes through in his playing on almost a subconscious level, that means someone else can step forward. And it goes for about 2 minutes, and then Paige turns it up. And it's funny you mentioned the rumble pad. I don't know if it's Paige or Mike, but I wrote somebody shocks the ground at 12 minutes and 40 seconds. They don't go in a different direction totally, but the intensity, there's something about that timestamp at 12:40 that something ups the intensity and the, I guess, eagerness of the audience at that point. And you feel it even listening, like I said, in my car.
Yeah, that's like in my notes I've got here we go. Like that just felt like all right, like this, and there's that building of speed, right? That like Mike and Phish are laying that groove and like pushing it, and then Trey comes in on rhythm, and like they're all just exploring speed, and we like get this breakthrough, and that's kind of how I have it in my notes. Like we went from that terrestrial grindy kind of sense in the middle to now we've like broken free, and we're gliding and kind of getting ready to cruise, but like starting to ask like the questions like what's next, and then we kind
Yeah.
of get into that next section, right? That's like Southern rock, like Allman Brothers, like we're road tripping now, like cruising along, like on a train. And that's like we're pumping, right?
Which has been another recurring theme this past summer of Allman Brothers sort of rock, where my timestamp is 17 minutes. I just called it rhythm based rock and guitar led noodling. And I guess the way I phrased it is, it sounds like it could have come from Kill Devil Falls instead of Simple.
Yeah,
I mean, Simple is miles away right now. And, when you say that at this point of a jam, people start asking what's next or thinking what's next. This is the part where I start checking my watch, not out of boredom, but to say, how long has this been going? Because, like I said, Simple doesn't exist anymore. We are
yeah,
completely in the universe, and who knows where we're going next. But to me, this is where we are type 2 completely in a brand new space. And lightning strikes, I wrote it 18 minutes. They're on a cutting edge. No one necessarily knows what's coming next, but they're all in the same place at the same moment for many moments. I use the word bliss several times in this whole review in all of these notes. But man, this is where I feel like eyes closed, hands up. Who knows who's behind you? Who knows who's in front of you? This is why we go to Phish shows.
yeah. It's like it's playful, it's effervescent, it's efficient, right? That's like I have that written down. It feels like easy, like we're soaring, but still like in the bounds of gravity. So like that's my like airplane kind of analogy, right? We're
Yeah.
like exploring that space between being terrestrial and rooted to the ground with like going fast enough that now like oh we can have this thing that oh it can do this too, and then
Yeah.
and that's kind of like what it seems like they is how the jam evolves is they go to the lab and they're like, all right, I think we can make it do this. And then like they get going fast enough and Trey's like, yep, we can do that. And then they're like, all right, back to the lab. But it just keeps pushing the boundaries further and further. And that's like to your point where when they get to those points that it's not simple anymore, right? We're just like in this space where who knows how high or how long they're gonna go because it feels like at any or you forget that they can even pull the plug, right? Like we're getting to that territory at the 18, 19 minute mark that we're getting towards here.
Yeah, and you called it efficient. It should be noted this is a 40-minute jam, but there's no wasted time. So I agree
Yeah.
with you on the efficiency. It feels like there's nowhere to go. We're not in any rush. We know what's next. We don't have to go anywhere else. And at 20 minutes, Mike shows up again, like at the beginning of the jam. And Paige is kind of splitting the difference where he's holding down the middle while Trey and Mike kind of figure out where it's going next. And there's a deliberate change at 22 and a half where Fishman speeds up like crazy. Paige is playing almost like a 2001 A Space Odyssey, not the band, not I'm sorry, not the song that we're all familiar with, not when they kick into 2001, but I'm referring to the movie, the film, the Stanley Kubrick movie, where
Yeah.
Paige is playing the synthesizer. And to me, this reminded me at the end of the film of the Stargate sequence, where Dave, the astronaut, is just going through multicolors and dimensions and strange things to see. This is kind of what it sounds like. And then the band is toying with going in a minor key under him, but they don't. And then, holy shit, I couldn't believe it. This is my favorite part of the jam. I'll say it straight out. At about 23 and a half minutes, it sounds like a Who song. Big power chords, and they stick to bliss, happy, upbeat power rock. If I could bottle this, I'd be a millionaire.
They're just like, how much Trey's like, how much power can you give me? And then watch what I can do. And so this is that euphoric, we're soaring, we're like defying gravity is what I have written down. Like we could really make this thing take flight, and you get to go on that ride with them, and you got that feeling, right? And this is probably where my heart rate was the highest it was the entire time. Like I can see in because it's a 40-minute song, so I can see close enough to the minute where my heart rate goes up. So I have a pretty good idea that this is where I peaked the highest, and then coming back the second time around at the end, right before they rip the full chord, there's a second peak. But this is like you're saying, like bottle this up. Like this is full lights on. Like everybody should be peaking right now.
I have a feeling that everybody was. I have a
Yeah,
sense, we've been there with these long jams where there's a moment where everyone realizes they're not going back. They're
right.
past the point of no return. And spoiler alert for everyone listening who doesn't know this jam, they do eventually come back to simple, which is something else I loved about 2024, that they landed the jams. They almost always went back into the song, which I really appreciate because sometimes I forget how it started. And
Yeah,
at this point, when they do the big Who like power chord parts and Page gets on the organ and he and Trey are kind of echoing each other, there's a point, and I think my most recent, maybe it was also in Mexico in 2024, but my most visceral memory of this feeling was, I think the date was December 30th, 2019, where they played, I think it was Tweezer, that was something like 35 minutes or something. And there was a point right at here, right at about 25 minutes, when people started checking their watches and looking at each other and being like, we're here for this, right? Like, what's going on right now. It kind of became meta, like very self aware that you are in the moment hearing a capital G great jam.
yeah. It's fun. Well, it's interesting to have that tether, right? Like, and that's where the progression of the jam, where they take you to that point, and you're off in whatever world you might be in, but then they pull you back and you're like, oh, like, yeah, like, wait, we're still doing this. And you have those moments, and it's almost like those reality checks help make those, right, tension and release. That's
Yeah.
but they don't let you know where they're going next. And I think what really stood out from this jam to me, and I've read in some reviews too, right, is like there's distinct parts, but it's onward. It never lacks for a sense of being assertive and knowing that it wants to go on. And that's, so there are times when noodling, or we're peaking, and it's in songs, and it's euphoric and we're all having a good time, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going somewhere. And this was just always onward. Like we had more to say, more to do.
Yeah, a lot more release than tension, but we are kind of rounding third base soon. And around 27 and a half minutes, there's that big, explosive, joyous section, but the band again gets a little quieter dynamically, even if not in terms of volume. Like I could sense a little bit of conflict, like they have one foot in a minor key. Fishman doesn't seem eager to let up on this incredible beat he's been keeping for almost a half hour. And just as I thought that, he drops back right into halftime. And then it slows down a little bit. Page gets real weird with certain effects. And this is the part I think we were referring to at the very beginning of our conversation about this jam, that some of the low notes, to me, I thought the brown note from an early episode of South Park, where Mike, I think it's Mike, it might be Paige, where it just kind of surrounds you. You mentioned the rumble pad. When I was listening to this in my car, this is the part that almost made me veer into another lane. It turned my car into a rumble pad.
Yeah, it was awesome, right? Then
Yeah,
that's
it's
it.
incredible.
All right, back to the drawing board, and they're in their conversation. It's like Paige is running the numbers and saying, like, like, I think they can probably go to outer space too. And and then but then it comes back to Mike, right? That
Yeah.
Mike being assertive, and that's what really sticks out, I think, to me here too. And I was like locked into him, and really, when they hit those brown notes, you have that visceral feeling of, and being in the pit too,
Right.
made it, you can see how Mike would need that, or it would amplify his ability to explore. And that's what I wonder, like, what's it feel like for them? What is that visceral feeling? And this is, getting to big picture stuff, but what is it, the shared experience? How is our combined experience of feeling this euphoria, but then coming back down together, because we're on this ride together, right? So I know my heart rate's going up and down. That's easy to track. What else? What other minute interactions are happening between the members of the audience and the members of the band. I think in the GQ article, Mike talked about that point where there's not a distinction between the band and the crowd. In this section, that I really like felt that we had gone beyond any place that we knew we were capable of going. We were there together. So it was just interesting to think like physiologically what's happening there, right? That's where my science brain is coming at. But thinking back to it, like I can feel I have a visceral memory of being there, feeling hearing what the music was doing to my body and what the vibration was experiencing throughout my body too, which is pretty amazing to think that was a shared experience too.
Yeah, and this is the point. I mean, you could hear it around 31 minutes. There's a big cheer from the crowd. Everyone seems to be either catching their breath or just an acknowledgement what's already been accomplished in this jam. And then just a minute or two later, the band is kind of breaking down a little bit. Like there's not a lot of direction toward the end, about 35 minutes. Fishman is sort of keeping a beat, but the melody, and pardon my lack of vocabulary, but it's kind of, I wrote smushy. And then just as I say that, Fishman comes back into the jam with a huge beat, like Godzilla. And they find the backbeat again. They're peaking again at 38 minutes before the Mammoth Jam ends. And it's kind of gets back in the neighborhood of simple. And then they land it perfectly. Just like the beginning, the ending, it takes a minute for everyone to hook up at the right tempo and, well, quote unquote, right tempo, but at the same tempo and to get on the same page. But it's almost like, what else do we need at this point? They just staked their claim. Everything from here on out is gravy. It's the second song of the second set. And the show, I don't want to say it's over, but a peak has been reached. And I imagine that everyone there acknowledges it in whatever way they do.
Yeah, it's right. Like they pull that tether and you start coming back to Earth. We're in outer space, and it feels like, all right, like we did that, and we're gonna kind of just slowly drift back down. But then they're like, oh wait, this thing can fly still.
Yeah, there's more.
And then the
yeah.
It's like, yeah, we're gonna do like one more time. We'll like rev her up one more time on our way back down for you. So yeah, it was just like it was like a victory lap. That's what it felt like, and it felt again that euphoria that we had come from in maybe that second section right before the spacey part that you were talking about bottling up. We got a little after dinner drink, right?
Yeah.
And
A
this was
nightcap, yeah.
so it was like a way to be like, all right, we can do this, but then it's like, all right, here's gravity, and then to just like come back together and wrap it all up with a bow. And what stood out to me too there, you talked about finishing it and like the idea of what are the lyrics saying? Like, we've got it simple. Like at the end of the day, like it's four dudes up there, right? But it's four dudes that like are putting this pretty magical thing out there. But it's we had it simple. So that feeling of the crowd like singing along, that it's beyond anything else that I've experienced from a visceral shared communal white light like moment, right? But the thing, like, it's what we're all looking for. It's what we're all looking for, because it truly felt at times like we had accomplished this. Like we were along for the ride. You know, some of the things that I've heard the band say that I like to hope are true is like that's what they're looking for too, right? Like they feed off of our energy, and it's something that we get to share together, which is really special. So like when those house lights come on, or they shine the spots on the crowd, and we're all like, I like to think that they truly value that, because it's meaningful to us, and it's cool to know that this band is doing it for 40 years, right? And they're playing 40-minute jams, right? It's crazy. Like when you come back and wrap this thing up at the end of the day, like 40 minutes later, it's the longest Alpine jam ever. It's the longest simple ever. It's the top 10 long just jam ever, but it never felt like it was a long jam in the moment, right? And that's what I think made it really special to me. And to your point, like to this day, it's one of those that I'll keep going back to. And it's the fastest 40-minute song that I've ever listened to, or that exists. It's like this time suck, right? But it takes you to this space that you want to keep going back to in whatever capacity you can get there.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for not only taking the time to come speak to the Attendance Bias audience about this magnificent jam, but also adding the dimension of something that we all know is happening during a really exciting part of a show, but maybe, and I'm speaking for myself, and I'm guessing a good amount of the audience, but maybe lack the vocabulary and the scientific knowledge or angle to kind of understand what's happening. And I'm going to look at different Phish jams differently now the next time I'm at a show, and I know that my heart rate is going up because I can feel that too. You know, I'm a diabetic, and sometimes a low blood sugar increases my heart rate because like my body is physiologically reacting to distress at that time. A good Phish jam, ironically, the complete opposite of distress, sometimes it makes me feel similarly, where my heart is beating fast and I start sweating and I'm, clutching my my fingernails into my palms and getting really excited and tense, but also relaxed and happy at the same time. So, man, you just gave me a completely different way of experiencing Phish, and I can't wait the next time that it comes around. So thank you for coming on and sharing this experience with not just me, of course, but with the Attendance Bias audience.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure talking Phish and physiology. Enjoy your next show, and the next time you listen to Phish, think about how it makes you feel, because that's important.
Today was a shorter episode, but Andy and I still got into it and pretty deep at some parts, so we got to make sure we got everything right.
Attendance bias fact check.
Andy mentions that Eau Claire, Wisconsin has one, quote, Phish credit to its name, and that was when Trey played solo acoustic in 2019 and played a Bon Iver song. That show is on Monday, October 21st, 2019 at the Pablo Center at the Confluence. The Bon Iver song that he played was Towers, and Trey did discuss the similarities between Eau Claire and Burlington, Vermont. Andy brought up the Glens Falls show and its accompanying Attendance Bias episode. To be clear, he's talking about the famous Halloween 1994 show, and the Attendance Bias episode with guest Jeff Paradise aired on April 3rd, 2024. Simple debuted on May 27, 1994 at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. By the time this episode airs, there should also be an episode available with guest Adam Jerugim about that show. As I mentioned, I do not like to date when certain episodes are recorded, but this episode with Andy was the 5th episode about a show from 2024 that was recorded in 2024. It's the 6th if you count the Mondegreen wrap-up episode, so something about 2024 spoke to the fans big time. Finally, the version of Tweezer that I mentioned that last blew my mind was on December 30th, 2019 at Madison Square Garden, and it is described in part on the Phish.net jam charts as, quote, symphonic in scope, and inarguably among the most sublime masterpieces of improvisation in Phish's illustrious history, end quote. Recommended listening. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Andy for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode, and the Mockingbird Foundation for everything it does to help children's music education. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You could leave a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You could follow Attendance Bias on social media. And finally, you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.